And so you have to provide callbacks all over the place. Well, the way the stack works with callbacks, is everyone familiar with program stack? I think that's a pretty common thing. So you call this function, adds on stack, call this function, adds to the stack, and then you call this function that sets a callback, your stack unwinds. So every time you reach an end of a function, your stack is at 0 in JavaScript. Unless it's the return, of course, and then if you go down to the one below you. But when you reach the end of all the calls, you're at the bottom of your stack. But you may have all these event listeners happening. And then the database gets back to you, or the browser hits your request, or some event happens, or in the browser, someone clicks a button, some event happens. Your callback will then get called with a brand new stack. So that try-catch block you had around the old stack, JavaScript throws those away when the stack is gone. So even though you had a try-catch around your callback, it's not caught. And that really throws people for a loop. In fact, the only way to safely try-catch anything in Node is to try-catch every single layer of function, which gets really ugly really fast because you're already nesting it once for every non-blocking call. And so a lot of the first Node code we called was the pyramid style because it was just indented and then back out. Maybe it looked like a pyramid. So the pattern I'm doing here is right before I call logic publish, which is synchronous code, and then I give it a callback for when it's done, because I do something async too. So I wrap that in a try-catch. Now I'm also storing the result here. So this publish function could choose to not call my callback. It could instead just return, because maybe it doesn't need to do anything asynchronous. Maybe it can just return the value immediately. So I want to allow them that flexibility. So I'll check. If result is not undefined, which means if they returned anything, then assume that's the value they want to send to the callback. And all Node callbacks, the first argument is the error, and everything after that is the data. So I'm going to pass it on to the callback for them, so they can say return foo instead of saying callback null comma foo, which looks really ugly. And then if there's an error, of course, if it's an exception that happens synchronously, this will catch it, and then I pass it to the callback using next error. And as long as your framework does this at every level, errors always get caught. You can do it synchronously, asynchronously as you want. It's really nice. But you got to be careful, because anytime you enter a new function callback, it's not synchronous anymore. Is that making sense? Any questions? Yes?
So, what do you think about introducing continuations and re-threading to Node?
Yes, very good question.
Because I've been looking at this and we actually have a working prototype of this for our own stuff. So we've been looking at, if we could do this for Node, but there's a lot of opinions that say, well, it's probably good to use the callback method of JavaScript, because if you use continuations, it kind of breaks the whole idea of global state. So
yeah.
What do you think about that?
So I agree with Ryan on this one. Back in the early days of Node, there was a huge debate over this. People were saying they wanted blocking functions in Node. Ryan says, no, we can't have blocking functions in Node, because it's the whole event model. If you have anything blocking, your entire server is stuck. It can't take new requests, everyone gets rejected.
That's not true if you have green threads.
Yeah, if you have green threads, correct. And so, but we didn't at the time. And so there was this big argument between all async or adding blocking. And Ryan said, you know what, fine. And he implemented coroutines. And we're like, okay, that works. We were all happy. And then after many, many months, we found out that was a very bad idea, because suppose it was promise.wait, if anyone remembers it. So suppose I want to do a database call. Here, we'll do this. So we got some database library, query. Yeah, that's true. How's that? I keep forgetting Eclipse. Alright. Stack slider from users. And normally you'd have to give it a function with the data, right? Well, that's inconvenient. So what if we could do wait, which is what Node used to have. And what wait would do is it would stop the event loop here. This code would stop executing, and then it would pass off to other code, which would would run other single-threaded code. It was still single-threaded. But the problem was, you didn't know what happened while it was waiting. Anything could happen. And so, maybe you had some variable in the line before this you just set, and then the line after this, that variable is no longer set. It was deleted or changed or renamed, or, well, not renamed, but something happened because this other code ran in another context, changed it. And so essentially, you have all the same problems you do with thread safety, where with threads, with preemptive threads, anything can happen between any line of code. You can't ever assume that between two atomic system calls, something won't change. And granted, this was a little more controlled because this dangerous thing only happened at these points where you had the wait call. But there's nothing stopping you from wrapping that in a function. Something, you get the point. Which then return to this. And that's in some library that you include. You've never read the code before. And you call get users, not realizing that that is a blocking call using coroutines, and crazy stuff's going to happen in between. So now the burden is on the programmer to look at the code of every single library they use on every single line, or lock every variable they ever use. I mean, it can be doable. We do it with threads all the time. But one of Ryan's points with Node is you don't have to worry about this stuff. So he pulled it out. He didn't want coroutines in Node. I mean, they do give you really nice synchronous-looking syntax, but they do have hidden side effects that are almost as bad as threading. And they actually make the code quite a bit slower, too, because you have to switch context in V8. You now have, like, multiple stacks, and it's just really messy. So Ryan and I both really don't want them in Node. It's just something we do.
Okay, so scope contexts and essentially using closures do not alleviate the problem. Because I can see the problem when you have globals and these types of things, but you just write nicely nested, safe JavaScript.
Yeah.
Is it still a problem?
Not as much. But, I mean, we even left it in until, I think the break-in point was when Ryan spent 3 days debugging something and it was caused by these coroutines, and he finally figured it out, and he just had enough of it and ripped it out. He's like, well, if I can't figure it out, and it takes me 3 days to do this, it's gonna bug other people too. But yeah, if you use a lot of closures and local variables, it's not as bad. There are other solutions to the problem. The syntax isn't quite as elegant, but they're a lot safer. You still have a single stack, single threaded model, which is definitely the easiest to understand. The one I use is a library called Step. Has anyone used Step before? Alright. Anybody used promises before? The node promises. Okay. Or is it Chris Zip that does the new ones? Or Chris Cole? Do you remember Malta? Both, yeah, they work together. But yeah, so there's a new promise library which works like the promises in Node. And that gives you a very object-oriented way of handling this. I forget the syntax, but it's not nasty nesting. Basically, asynchronous functions return a promise object, which you can then add callbacks to, and it just looks a lot better. Mine's Step is more functional-based, so let's take a use case. Suppose you want to query a database for a list of IDs, and then based on those IDs, you want to go do a bunch more queries, like the Flickr example we saw earlier. 5 minutes? Okay. So, db query, we'll select ID from users. I'm just going to simplify this. You should have error handling in here. And then, that's IDs. Probably have a where clause on the first one, but this is just an example. So make it this library here. Are you seeing some nesting issues here? Yeah, it's clipping bad. It's clipping on my screen too. But that's the point, is you start